Hi, this is Craig Stocks here at Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And just as a reminder, next month in September we have our astrophotography workshop coming up. We teach here in St. George. You can get more information about that from our website by clicking here for more information, and it will take you to another web page that has all the details about the class and my co-instructor, Dr. Christian Sase, the astronomer in charge at iTelescope. So check that out if you're interested. And for now, we're going to do a processing tutorial using one-shot color, something I haven't done. I don't think I've done very many tutorials on this, but we'll use a one-shot color and also we'll add some HA captured with an Optolong L-eNhance filter. And we're going to be doing that in PixInsight and Photoshop. So to be really honest, I started processing this image in PixInsight and decided it would be a good subject for a tutorial. This is the Galaxy NGC7331, and it's notable right now because it has a supernova near the core, but it's quite visible in astrophotos. And I'm going to just go ahead and close these files and start over. So I'm just going to go to File, Close All, and confirm that yes, I want to close those files. Now I've already run these through WBPP, so that was just kind of a standard WBPP for a color image, so selecting the color filter array for both the flats and the lights. And the result of that is a master folder, or masters folder, and in that is the two luminance, which is just shot through a clear glass filter, and the L-eNhance. So I'll open both of those. And what I typically like to do when I have multiple files open is I'll go to Window, Tile, and that will arrange the two, and then I can just zoom in and out with the scroll wheel on the mouse. And if I just tap Control A, that will do an auto stretch on each one of the images, so I can do Control A on each one. You notice they have a very strong green color cast. That's not unusual. I do know from processing these earlier that there's some registration artifacts around the edges that I want to crop out. If I do an unlinked stretch, that does kind of the equivalent of an auto white balance. You can kind of see a little bit of the artifact here and along the bottom. So what I'm going to do is go to Process, Geometry, and Dynamic Crop. And what this lets me do is define a crop region to crop out that area where we have the stacking artifact. And then I'm going to just drag the triangle over to the other image and apply the crop to that one first. And it says, do I want to really crop that because it will undo the astrometric solution? Yep, I know that. So we'll crop that, and then I can just click the check mark at this point and it'll apply the crop to this image. And again, I'll confirm yes, I want to do that, and we can close the dynamic crop. Now that did remove the astrometric solution. So to restore that, I'm just going to go to Script, Astrometry, Image Solver, and we'll go ahead and do a plate solve on this image. Now because this was captured with an astronomical camera, and I used Voyager as my session manager, it has all of the location, RA, deck information already in the FITS header. Image Solver picks that up automatically, so I don't really need to do anything other than just click OK on for the astrometric solution. And this is done now. It has solved this image, and I just want to copy that astrometric solution over to the one captured with the L-eNhance. So to do that, in newer versions of PixInsight, I can now on Windows hold the Shift and Windows key, and then click on the tab, drag that over to the tab on the target image and release it. And that has now copied the astrometric solution over, and that will let us do spectrophotometric color calibration when we get to that step. First thing I want to do is remove the gradient. You can see there's a fairly significant gradient from the bright moon last night. And what I like to do is use an image container. So you can get to this image container by right-clicking on the background. Now, because I have these tiled, the only place the background is visible is down here in the below my saved process icons. But I can just right-click and choose Image Container, and then choose to add views. There are the two views that are open. I'll just select all, click OK. So now we have these two images in an image container, and I can run gradient correction on both of those by just dragging the triangle over to my saved gradient correction process icon. And now PixInsight is going to go through and do gradient correction for both of these images. Gradient correction is done. The next thing I want to do is run Blur Exterminator in correct only mode, and I'm going to again run this on both of the images. So I'm going to drag the triangle from this image container over to the Blur Exterminator correct only. Again, this is a saved process icon. I haven't updated the screen transfer function because most of these steps, it doesn't really matter what the image looks like. It's going to look like what it looks like, and I'm just going to keep chugging along until we get to the point that we have applied spectrophotometric color calibration and Blur Exterminator again to correct the background. And then I'll finally start to worry about what the image looks like. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit, you've probably already seen this dust mote here in the center of the image. Because it's in the center of the image where there's no other real detail around it, that's going to be extremely easy to fix in Photoshop. And no, I'm not going to use the clone stamp tool. We'll do something better. But we'll correct that when we get to Photoshop. For now, I'm just going to pretend that's not there. And Blur Exterminator is done now. And next I want to do the spectrophotometric color calibration. The image on the right was captured just with a clear glass filter. So I'm going to use a version of SPCC that I have configured for one-shot color. And I'll just drag the icon onto the image and we'll let it run. These saved process icons are really handy, and you create those by just opening whatever process you want to save, do whatever configurations, whatever settings are appropriate, and then use the triangle in that process icon and just drag it out, and that will create a new process icon with those settings. So this one's done, SPCC has finished, and now if we update our screen transfer function, we'll get a better view of what this really looks like now that it has been color corrected. I'm going to do the same thing to the other image. Now this was captured with an L-eNhance image, so I'm going to use a version of SPCC that has settings for the L-eNhance filter. And it does have L-eNhance, L-Extreme, a lot of the different dual narrowband filters. It has settings that you can choose from the drop-down menus for red, green, and blue filters. So that makes life a lot easier. And again, I just made those configurations and then saved that process icon. This is done now, so we can update the screen transfer function. And notice that I'm not opening and closing images. I'm just kind of chugging along. The top tab turns blue to show you which image is currently selected. So right now I can see that the L-eNhance is my currently selected image. So anytime I perform an operation such as the screen transfer function, it's going to operate on this image. If I just click over here, you can see the blue has changed, and now anything will automatically affect this image. So I can just leave both images open all the time and move back and forth very easily. The last thing I want to do is run Blur Exterminator in its default mode. So again, I'll just drag the triangle over to my saved Blur Exterminator process icon, and we'll let this run. So Blur Exterminator has now finished, and now it's time to stretch the images. And I'll just move this image container out of the way for now. And to stretch the images, I'm going to use the screen transfer function and the histogram transformation tool, because that will let us apply what we see in the screen transfer function. And let's start with the one over here on the left. So I'll just click to make sure that one's selected. I will update the screen transfer function with the radioactive button. And I want to make a few changes in the default stretch here. Mostly I want to darken the background, so I can zoom in on these sliders by using the scroll wheel on the mouse. And if I position the pointer in between, what we're doing is just zooming in and kind of getting a more detailed view of these two sliders. These two sliders are the black slider and the midpoint slider. So those will correspond in the histogram transformation. It'll correspond to this black slider and this midpoint slider. And I can make it a little bit brighter. And then I'm going to darken the background so we get a little more contrast. But I don't want the background to be black. I want it to be dark gray but not black. Maybe something like that. So I'll drag the triangle down to the histogram transformation and watch this straight line when I drag it down. So I'll drag the triangle down to the bottom bar, and when I release, you can see that it has now copied these settings to the histogram transformation tool. Click the solid square and that will apply it. And that image turns white. Now I'll just click to select the other image, move this out of the way. Again, I will update the screen transfer function, and since this is the selected image, that's the one it's currently looking at. And again, I'm going to darken the background a little bit, and I want to brighten the highlights, but I want to keep detail in the core, so I can't go too much brighter without starting to blow out the core. So that's probably about all I can do. Maybe darken just a little bit, but I don't want to darken so much that we start losing a lot of the extents of the galaxy. So again, I'll drag the triangle over to the histogram transformation tool, click the square, and again it applies to this image because that's the one that has been selected. Now we're done stretching the images. I'll close these two tools, and I can just press F12 to turn off the screen transfer function. And note when I do that, it also turns off this green highlight that shows that a screen stretch is being applied. I turn off the screen stretch. Now we see the images in their nonlinear state. The last thing I want to do is apply a combination of noise exterminator and star exterminator to separate the stars from the background. And again, I've got a saved process container that does both of those steps. And so I'll just drag the triangle from my image container over to the process container. And when I let go, now it'll run noise exterminator and star exterminator on both of the images that are listed in the image container. Okay, noise exterminator and star exterminator are completed, so we're pretty much done here in PixInsight. And one thing I want you to notice, as we went through the process here, there really wasn't anything that required judgment or artistic intent or anything from me. It was just really just turn the crank and get the results. And that's one of the things I like about this approach to image processing, is you can go through all of the tools in PixInsight, and you could probably teach an 8-year-old how to just go step, 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 step. It doesn't really require any judgment to be applied. I did do a little bit of adjustment to the auto stretch before I applied it, but to be honest, that's not really that important. That's a kind of a subtlety that you can just apply the default auto stretch and still get great results using this process. So This is the stars from the L-eNhance, and these are the stars from the luminance, or just plain RGB. These are the true colors for the stars. The L-eNhance, probably colors are close but not exactly right. But notice the stars are a little bit tighter, and that's typical with narrowband stars. So I'm going to save both of these stars, and I do want to apply one more step. And I've got a saved process icon called Enhance Stars that increases saturation, or decreases red and decreases green. So I'll just apply that. And again, the settings are already saved. And now I'll save this as a 16-bit TIFF file. And we want to save this in the appropriate folder. And I'm going to save it as a TIFF. And just click 16-bit. And we're done with this image, so I'm just going to minimize it. And I'm going to do the same thing with the narrowband L-eNhance stars. And again, I'll just go to File, Save As. And I want to save this in the same folder as a TIFF. We'll choose 16-bit. And now we need to save these two images. This is the L-eNhance image. So again, I'll need to navigate to the correct folder and change the file type to TIFF. Most of our creative work, or image manipulation, anything that requires some input or some judgment, for the most part, all of that's going to happen in Photoshop. Notice when I saved the L-eNhance image, I minimized it, and then the PixInsight automatically jumped to the next image that was open, which was the luminosity. So again, I don't have to do much image jumping around. When I minimized this image, it automatically moved the focus to the next image. 16-bit. And now we're ready to open this image in Photoshop and do the this is where the real work takes place. So first thing I want to do is open all of those images as layers. So I'm going to go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and that brings up this dialog box where I can browse for the files I want to open. And these, of course, are the 16-bit files that I just saved. So we'll navigate to that same folder. Here are the 4 TIFF files. Click OK. In there, it shows the list. Click OK again, and now it's going to actually open those 4 files. Now, in Photoshop, there's some real easy ways that we can put this image together in Photoshop, and then we can get more elaborate as we move forward. So right now, you never know for sure what order the files are going to open in Photoshop, but here's the luminosity layer on top, and I can use the eyeball to turn off that layer and see what's underneath. There's the L-eNhance data. These are the stars from the L-eNhance, and then at the bottom is the stars from RGB. And so I'll just turn these back on. We always want the stars at the top. So an easy way to do this, if I just click and drag this layer up to the top of the layer stack, now we have the stars on top and everything else underneath. If I put this layer in screen blending mode, we basically get back the same image we started with in PixInsight before we removed the stars. And if we zoom in here in Photoshop, right here is that supernova. It's quite bright right now. So we can make this image a lot better, but if you just want to get started by organizing the layers so that the stars are on top and then the RGB or luminosity layers underneath it, you can put the stars back in. One of the key features of Photoshop is when you're working with layers, you can add adjustment layers. And adjustment layers only affect what's below that adjustment layer. So for instance, if I add a levels adjustment layer, Notice it's sitting between the luminosity RGB layer and the stars. I can turn the stars on and off and see just that luminosity layer. If I go to this adjustment layer, it has 3 sliders underneath the histogram, and then there's 2 more down below on a grayscale. And the way these work, this is the black point, in the center is the midpoint, and at the far side is the white point. And if I move this black point slider in, you could, if you want to think about it this way, it's setting where on this histogram are the values going to go to pure black. So if I move it in, you can see the background goes to pure black. Generally, we don't want that. We want our background to be dark but not pure black. I can also adjust the white point by moving the white point slider in. And again, you can think of this as, if you look at the reading, right now that says 229. So anything with a value of 229 or higher would be treated as white. We probably don't want to do that because that's going to blow out the detail in the core. So we'll move this back over to where it came from. The bottom sliders work just the opposite, where this black slider sets the black point so that grays become darker. This bottom slider sets it so that the black point becomes lighter. So if I move this black point slider on the lower grayscale to the right, what it's doing is it's saying this value, right now it's at 37, is going to not let anything be darker than 37. Or if I go to the 255 value over here, I'm darkening the whites so that the brightest value would be 243. Most of the time you won't use these bottom 2 sliders, you'll only use the ones right under the histogram. And it's usually just a matter of adjusting the black point to be dark, and you might adjust the midpoint. The midpoint's going to bring out more of this glow around the galaxy. And then of course we've got the other little galaxy cluster over here. Now there's a lot of weird stuff going on in the background. We've got this dust mote, we've got some light areas and some dark areas, probably caused from incomplete gradient correction. But the background, other than these galaxies off in the distance, the background for the most part is just going to be black or dark gray and featureless in this image. So I'm going to add just a solid color fill layer, and I have to get that from this little yin-yang looking symbol here at the bottom. And I want to have values of 19, 19, and 19 for red, green, and blue. And notice that that corresponds to 13, 13, 13 in hexadecimal. And now I'm going to use another blending mode. We used screen, if you recall, on the stars, and that layer is still turned off. If I put this solid color fill layer in lighten blending mode, what it's going to do is anything that is darker than 19, 19, 19, it's going to raise it up to that level. And I can see visually, I've got a black background in Photoshop, and I can get to that by just right-clicking here in the background area, and I can choose default color is medium gray. I can choose black, dark gray. I can choose a custom color, and I've already set white as a custom color. So that makes it real easy for me to go between white, default, and black. And I like to use black for astro images because it gives me a black reference, and I know I don't want this background to be any darker than that. So now if we come back down to this levels adjustment layer, if I make the background darker, it's going to get darker, but it's not going to get any darker than this solid color layer of 19, 19, 19. And I can turn that off and on, and you can see the difference. And you can see how it really just smooths out those areas that are just kind of noisy or incomplete. Now, if we want to be a little bit more refined, I really don't want to make the background overall any darker than about that setting, which is happens to be 21. The number doesn't really matter. But I want to darken these corners and this dust mote and this little glow here and some areas over here. So I'm going to add just a blank layer, and I can use the icon at the bottom of the layers palette to add a blank layer. And I'm going to put it in soft light blending mode. What soft light does is it lets you darken or brighten depending on whether you're painting on this layer with black or white. So if I grab my brush tool, and I can get to it by just tapping B, and let's set the opacity at about 20%, and I can go right to that by just tapping the 2 key. I have black as my foreground color. Now watch what happens. I'll start on this corner. I'll just paint with 20% black, paint with 20% black again, and now that little glow has disappeared. We'll do the same thing up here, same thing over here, same thing here in the center, and now I'll paint even more. Notice there's a galaxy off in the distance, and that's the beauty of using this soft light blending mode. I didn't really affect the galaxy, I only affected the areas that were already dark. Now, if I go heavy-handed enough, it will affect that galaxy, but for the most part, it didn't remove anything, I didn't paint over anything, I just darkened that area so that it's darker than this 19, 19, 19. If I turn that layer off, you can see it's still, it's actually uneven, but this solid layer just smooths everything out and lifts it up to that level. Now if I turn the stars back on, and so now we have another kind of finished image, but now we have cleaned up the background. If we want to clean up the stars a little bit, let's come to the stars layer, and we can darken the stars or make them a little bit smaller by using a levels adjustment layer. And right now, if I just add a levels adjustment layer, and remember an adjustment layer affects what's below it. I can darken this adjustment layer, and it darkens the stars, but it's also darkening what's below it, and I don't want to do that. I only want it to affect the stars. So what I'm going to do instead, and let's go ahead and delete this layer for now. I'm going to put these stars into a layer group. And what a layer group does is let you put one or more layers together. And the advantage of that is you can control whether the adjustment layers in that group affect only what's in the group or affect everything. So to put this layer into a layer group, the layer's currently selected. I'll tap Control G, and you can see it created a layer group, and then this layer is slightly indented. And if I turn the layer group off, you can see it also turns off that layer that's inside the group. I'll just double click on the name Group 1, change that to stars. And now I want to put the layer group in screen blending mode. Now that this is in screen blending mode, I can come back down inside the layer group and click on the stars layer. I can add an adjustment, levels adjustment layer. Now, if I darken by moving the midpoint slider to the right, you can see the stars get smaller, but the galaxy doesn't. So now I'm affecting just the stars, and I believe it's treating the supernova as a star. So I need to be somewhat careful. If I make the stars too dark, it just disappears. But you can see how you're able to control the brightness of the stars and the brightness of the background independently. I can do the same thing with the levels adjustment, or the luminosity layer. And let's just go ahead and put the luminosity layer, this levels adjustment layer, and this soft light, and even this solid color. Well, I'll leave the solid color layer out. Let's just take these three and Control G, and now we have another group, and this is the solid color, or the luminosity. And now we can do the same thing inside this layer group For instance, if I add a hue saturation adjustment layer and increase the saturation, we can increase the color saturation or density of the target or the features inside this group, but it doesn't affect the stars. If I want to increase the color saturation of the stars, I would come up to the stars layer group, add a hue saturation, and then increase the color saturation of the stars up here. So it gives you a huge flexibility to work with either just the stars, just the background, and then we use the solid color fill layer to kind of hide all of that noise and gradient stuff that was blotchiness that was going on in the background. Let's do two other things. I'm going to, remember we have these L-eNhance stars. And the advantage of the L-eNhance stars, if we look at just those, and I did that by alternate clicking, hold the alternate key and click on the eyeball, and it turns off everything but that layer. These are, I like these because they're smaller. So let's go ahead and drag the luminosity or the L-eNhance stars up into the stars layer group. Now, right now it's sitting below these luminosity stars, and it's in screen blending mode. I'm going to put it in normal blending mode. So these are the luminosity stars. These are the stars from the L-eNhance layer. And I like the smaller stars, and the supernova is very visible still with the L-eNhance stars. But I want the color from these luminosity stars because those are probably more accurate color. So to do that, I'm going to put this layer that has the RGB stars, I'm going to put it in color blending mode. And I do have a video just on blending modes. You might want to go back and look at that. But now what we're doing is we're taking the nice small size of the stars that were captured with the L-eNhance filter, and we're applying the color that came from the luminosity or just the plain RGB stars. And you can see we've got some nice color over here in this galaxy cluster. Let's do one last thing, and this is going to be a little bit more advanced. You may be happy to just quit here, but if you recall in our L-eNhance data, and let's look at that by itself, what we really wanted from it was some of this hydrogen alpha nebulosity in the NGC7331 galaxy. But we just want the red. We don't want anything else. So we're going to do a couple things here. I'll go ahead and turn everything back on. To start with, let's put this L-eNhance layer into a group, and we'll call it LE for L-eNhance. And I'm going to move this layer group up above the luminosity layer, but below this solid color fill layer. And I said I want just the red from this group. Now, the way we can get just the red is by turning off the other channels. So I can do that by right-clicking on either a layer or a layer group out to the right of the layer name. I'll just double-click here, and that opens up the layer blending options. And within the blending options, you can see that because this is an RGB image, we have red, green, and blue channels with a check mark by each one. If I want just the red, I can turn off green and blue. And now I'm getting just red from this layer. Now that's creating a lot of odd issues. The next thing I want to do is turn this from pass-through blending mode, which is the default for a layer group. I'm going to put this in screen blending mode. So now we're seeing red added from this L-eNhance image, but it's affecting everything because it's fairly bright. So let's add a levels adjustment layer, and we may be able to just darken things down And that may have darkened it so much it's not having an effect. The problem is, and you may have heard the term continuum subtraction, this hydrogen alpha is contaminated by white light that also happens to contain that same wavelength. So we use a process called continuum subtraction, where we subtract the main, the general red from the hydrogen alpha signal, and that lets us subtract the contamination from the hydrogen alpha signal. So to do that, I'm going to use, we've already got this RGB image, and this RGB layer has red, green, and blue, so it has the red that we want to subtract from the hydrogen alpha. So I'm just going to make a copy of this layer, and I'll do that with Control J, which will jump it to a new layer. And I'm going to drag this copy up right above the L-eNhance. Now, and we'll zoom in so we're a little focused. Now I want to subtract the luminosity from the L-eNhance. So to do that, again, we're going to use a layer blending mode, and we'll change the blending mode to subtract. And typically it subtracts too much. So I want to add a levels adjustment layer, and I want this levels adjustment layer to only affect the brightness of the luminance layer that we are subtracting. So to do that, I can add an adjustment layer so it's sitting right on top, and then in the adjustment layer properties there's an icon that if you hover over it, it tells you that this will create a clipping mask, or this clips this adjustment to the layer below it. And when I click on that, you can see that the little icon for the adjustment layer is inset, and it shows a little down arrow. That's showing that this adjustment layer is clipped to this layer, and it's only going to affect that layer. Typically, what I find is I'll have to move the midpoint slider to the right to brighten the red, or actually I guess that's darkening the red, and then I'll move this bottom slider to the left, to the right, to minimize the effect in the blacks area. So it's a matter of kind of fine-tuning the position of those two sliders, and then you may need to use a third adjustment layer and brighten the resulting effect overall. And it can be a little bit iterative as you go back and forth and find just the right setting so that you're subtracting the right detail. Still getting some contamination in the center, I believe. So in this case, there's not much added detail, but there is some. So you can see a little bit. Let me turn this layer group off and on. You can see those nebula regions in NGC7331 lighting up when I turn this L-eNhance layer group off and on. So the hydrogen alpha is coming from the image that uses the L-eNhance filter, and then we're subtracting that contaminating red using the RGB layer. We are using just the red channel from this layer group, and we have the layer group in screen blending mode. So now we have a pretty complete image. We have the galaxy over here, we have the supernova right there, we have the hydrogen nebula regions in the galaxy highlighted. We have a nice smooth noise-free background. We have good color because we use spectrophotometric color calibration. So this is pretty close to a finished image. The last thing I might do is add a little sharpening. And let's focus on just the luminosity layer. And when I apply a sharpening filter in Photoshop, it can be a destructive process. In other words, it changes pixels. And I don't want to do that. I want to preserve the integrity of the original data. So I'm going to convert this layer into a smart object by right-clicking and choose Convert to Smart Object. And what a smart object lets you do is apply filters interactively and non-destructively. So now I can go to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. And normally on these images, I know I need to be fairly aggressive with both the radius and the amount. But I can look at the image, because if I check Preview, it shows me a preview of that effect on the image in the background. So as I adjust the radius, I can see the effect. And I think that looks pretty good, so I'll click OK. Now, since this is a smart filter, if I decide that was too much or too little sharpening, I can come back to that filter setting. This is the smart filter now. There's the smart sharpen. And if I just double click on the word smart sharpen, that will reopen the filter with the settings that I had applied, and it lets me change those settings to something else if I need to. And then click OK, and it updates the image with those settings. So I'm going to say that's the finished image. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, just drop those in the comments down below. I'll be happy to try to answer those. If you are interested in learning more about this and other kinds of image processing, be sure to check out the link on our website at utahdesertremote.com for the upcoming masterclass here in St. George, Utah, where we'll be working on post-processing astro images, as well as we'll have night outings where we go out and do some Milky Way photography. Hope you found this useful. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions. And as always, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.